Because unicorns don't exist. It's a mythical creature and it puts so much pressure on all of us.
What can it mean to build something that feels meaningful and real and impactful, even if it is not those things? Every design has a consequence. We do live in a one-size-fits-men kind of world. What if instead of this like linear thing, businesses were designed circularly?
Don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. I would never do it alone again. Joy is really the fuel for regenerative businesses. We're here to reinvent ourselves all the time.
Just start does not mean to boil the ocean. Maybe life is, and entrepreneurship is about finding the balance that works for you.
So we're going to cover interesting topics about entrepreneurship and really want to rethink what it actually means to build something meaningful in today's world. Because we often hear that, stories about unicorns, but obviously not everybody is building a unicorn, and that's exactly the point. And so I think this idea of really, scaling fast, raising capital, have an exit, move on to the next thing is just one version of entrepreneurship. It's an important one, but it definitely doesn't reflect the reality of many entrepreneurs around the world. So what does it actually mean to build something meaningful, useful, and purposeful in today's world?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think I've had a journey of building a lot of little things over the last 10 years. And I've actually been very far away from this definition of entrepreneurship that you just described about, build fast, fail fast, and, scale and build big, even though that is the entrepreneurship sort of ecosystem that we live in. And it can be very nerve-wracking, or it can feel very intimidating to also call yourself an entrepreneur in such an ecosystem. And at the same time, I've had my whole journey in which I've tried to be very aware that this is what the ecosystem or the dominating story of the ecosystem is, and what can it mean to build something that feels meaningful and real and impactful, even if it is not those things. And so for me, it has really been about taking a step back and thinking about what feels close and genuine to who I am. What problems do I see in the world that I want to understand better and work towards rather than solve, I guess. And how can I do that in a way that feels not just impactful, but also fun and meaningful with the people that I enjoy spending time with. And so for me, my story of entrepreneurship has been about, what does it mean to, instead of scale, really look at doing things that are hyper local or hyper niche and really carving out a space that matters to me and that I think I can bring value to, and to look at impact not in terms of sort of like the regular conventional success metrics that every other business has, but really build success metrics that make sense to the business that I'm building.
Super interesting. And I'd love to hear more about the different initiatives and businesses that you have launched and been a part of. Clôd, before we dive into the details of Mansi's story, I would love to hear from you. What do you think it really takes to build something meaningful? Like, what does it mean, entrepreneurship, building something that matters for this time and age?
First of all, I would like to demystify the unicorn word and definition, because unicorns don't exist. It's a mythical creature and it puts so much pressure on all of us. This linear, fast-growing story of we have to build unicorns because they only exist for the investors and for the one that want to make more capital. So I love the picture of zebras, the zebra creature that is like in a herd, and there are more of them around, and they are black and white striped, so it's a mix of black and white, and it's not just crazy colors and not existing. The question is, how do we build something meaningful today? I think in my case, it was always feeling inside, what do I really need? And then the entrepreneurial approach would be to just undertake something to make me happy. I mean, it's really egoistic, but I was always creating out of a gap that I've seen in my own life. And then I looked around and I've seen that there are others who feel the same or who have the same needs as me. So I gathered them and we kind of created things together. That's it.
Yeah, I love it. And I also love what you're already alluding to, which is, kind of this idea of seeing a problem and having like this real drive and motivation to solve that problem. And as you said, right, come up with a solution that addresses this problem and doesn't just replicate a conventional model, but actually, what is needed to solve that particular issue and what is the right solution.
A quick note of thanks and a small invitation. If you're enjoying this podcast, subscribing is one of the easiest ways to support the work and help these conversations travel further. I really appreciate you being here.
So I'd love to hear a bit more, Mansi. Can you tell us a bit about those initiatives, those different companies or businesses that you have grown?
Yeah, and I'm going to start by just double clicking on what Claude said about, you asking the question, like, what will make me happy, even if it sounds egoistic. But let's imagine a world in which everyone was just thinking about trying to, make themselves content and happy, then like we would be living in a different world. And I don't mean that in the way of like content and happy with my unicorn, but like just really like what makes me feel, what gives me meaning, what gives me purpose, and what is also impactful for the world. And I think similar to you, I've kind of watched the cues in my journey, and that has a lot to do with what is in my sphere of influence. And I think, especially as a social entrepreneur, that's really, really important to remember, not just from the lens of doing smart business, but also from the lens of just being real about the things that you're able to do. And so, for example, for me, I come from a family that has a family factory in the leather space. And so one of my first businesses was around creating products that upcycled leather to create other beautiful leather products. So I created a brand around that, and it allowed me to express my creativity, not just in terms of product design, but also in terms of storytelling and bringing that product to market. And it gave me early on a few ways to just learn what that space is. And so that was a little bit in my sphere of influence because I had those resources at hand and I could see something where I could bring value in the factory that was part of my lineage and part of my family. And other than that, another professional thread of my life has been in international development, social impact, especially in the space of gender. So I happened to work for a few companies where I had jobs that were doing work in India in lower income sectors, especially with a focus on women. So I had done work in healthcare, reproductive healthcare especially, and female financial inclusion and things like that. And what that taught me and showed me was a real gap within the human-centered design space towards gender transformative and or women-centric design. So what I was learning was that we are all trained. We live in a world where we don't automatically think about women's lived experiences and women's needs. And even by practicing what we call human-centered design, we might miss out on designing with and for women. And so my kind of second venture was exactly around this space. I had been in it, I had lived in it, I had seen this gap. And I was excited about exploring what this gap was. And what was interesting in this space was I didn't really know what I was going to build or do, but I had an inquiry or a question that I was excited about. And so I just started to have conversations with people, kind of like the zebra herd, I guess, for me, with people, and started to ask them exactly this question. And we were able to unearth so many insights that overlapped, which then led to a toolkit, which I then shared with lots and lots of people around the world and turned into workshops and courses to really bring this practice of women-centric design to life. So that was kind of my second venture. And now I am doing a bit of that and also going back to the leather things that I talked about, supporting my sister, who's also an entrepreneur, and is building a small leather goods brand. And, we are really looking at it from the lens of like the world we are living in today. So, for example, instead of mass producing and selling, we do small batches so that we don't overproduce and we don't have waste. So we're really looking at those kinds of values and bringing those into the business, which is kind of opposite of how, usually entrepreneurs are or businesses are running with like very high goals and metrics. So we're really thinking about the values that ring true to us and bringing those into our businesses.
Yeah, I love this on so many levels. So something that immediately stands out for me is, if you were pursuing this growth story of, a unicorn or like, buying into that narrative and going down that path, you're talking about a manufacturing business, right? Of like a leather business. And so you would be scaling, like, you would be ramping up manufacturing capacity, producing. But what for, right? And that's, I think, to Clôd, to your point, is it to be the conventional success story? Is it to please investors, to accumulate capital, basically, to say it a bit provocatively? Or is it how you did it, taking a step back and saying, well, what does the planet actually need? Well, the planet needs upcycling. What does the future generation need, right? It's maybe producing in smarter batches and like not dominating the world with manufacturing at all costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think, for example, something I think about all the time is that we really don't need more shoes on this planet. Actually, like really, we should not be producing any of that. And we live in a world where people need jobs and things need to move forward. So how can we find a balance in which it's not extreme on either side, right? Like if I stop producing the shoes, the business would shut down, the factories it's supporting would shut down, and then like those livelihoods of those people are also gone. And so how do I find the balance of not overproducing, but also not the other extreme, which is, also important for the planet? And really being cognizant of the consequences we are bringing to the planet and to the ecosystems we are in as a result of our business. I feel one of the things we learned in design school is that every design has a consequence. And I think, especially in social entrepreneurship, it's really important to be very, very aware of the consequences you're producing, even if you're not able to mitigate them all, because that's a lie usually when you say I've mitigated all the consequences. Yeah,
super interesting. Clôd, how does that resonate with what you do?
It's really interesting because I got to know Mansi with her women-centric design framework and toolkit, and we had the chance to work together a little bit because nowadays I also run an agency for regenerative innovation and so on. So I'm more in the consultancy scene and so on. But before that, I also run an upcycling fashion brand, and that's so nice to hear that you've been also. Yeah, and I also want to cycle back to the word happy, because happy can be also a little bit negative. I think it's joyful, because what we see is that joy is really the fuel for regenerative businesses and for us to regenerate. And if we can create joy within our lives and within our communities and what we are doing, as long as it's joyful, I think it's healthy somehow and it's holistic. You asked us, Jessica, just a short overview. So I said, I run an upcycling fashion brand, but at the time, the word didn't exist yet. So I was basically just, I've seen a need, for myself. I didn't get what I wanted to wear, like more alternative and so on. So I started to do it myself. And then it evolved into an upcycling fashion brand, and it evolved into creating a fashion fair and design fair for other designers around us. At the time, then I moved to Vienna in Austria, and local producers, local fashion designers didn't earn the respect they should get. You had to go to Paris to be someone and to be listed in the media and so on. So I was like, no, I mean, we are local designers. We're here now. I moved to Vienna. I want to be seen. I want to have a place to be seen and heard. So that's what I did. I created opportunities not only for me, for my own little garments that I created, but also for all others. And I think that's also the red dots that I can see now looking back. At the time when I started, I didn't say I will be an upcycling fashion designer because first of all, I didn't study fashion, not at all. I kind of even hate the word fashion. But I've seen the abundance in trash. Trash is there all over the place. And I used discarded businessman suits because they are of a very good material still. And they exist in abundance. And I also had the gender approach of, gender bender, like taking the signs of power. Boys are always wearing their business suits and dressed up. And I just took them and we created new garments and new collections out of them with the help of local seamstresses, of socio-economic businesses. I involved others all the time. That's it. But then I moved forward, I mean, I have a certain age, thanks goddess, and we're here to reinvent ourselves all the time. That's the most powerful and joyful part of being an entrepreneur, because if you're creative as I am, you see needs and gaps all over the place, and then it's good to sit with it a little bit, observe it, let it rest, wait for it, don't go for it immediately, give it some time, see if it's still there around the corner the next day or something like that. It's not worth jumping on every little idea you see. That's too stressful. So at the moment I'm more like, okay, another idea, okay, let's wait and see.
I love what also, Claude, you brought in about that an entrepreneur's journey can also be multifaceted. And you've just described many different things that you do, and I've just described many different things that I do. And sometimes I think in this conventional entrepreneur definition, it's about I'm the person who is disrupting this thing, and then you just become about that. But we've just told stories of someone who has many paths, and we're doing things in many, many different areas. And I think that it's important to remember that entrepreneurs are like that they can have portfolios of different things. You don't have to, but you also don't have to be this is my lane, I am a tech entrepreneur, and that's all I am. I think it's nice to remember that and to bring that into the definition. And maybe, Jessica, I know you also have a lot of different entrepreneurial projects, so would also be nice to hear some of your insights along the way about what you have learned through all of your entrepreneurial pursuits.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that thing about jumping on all of the ideas, that's definitely been my entrepreneurial journey. So I think that's what I, did for the first maybe 15 years or so. I think now I'm also much more selective, but I definitely felt like I had this abundance of energy to just do everything. And I was basically working around the clock, but I don't think actually in a negative way. And maybe that goes back to what you said, about what gives you joy, what makes you happy, because I don't think I was the kind of entrepreneur or business person who was just working around the clock for, because of being a workaholic. But it actually really brought me joy. And it was because I saw problems. I wanted to solve those problems. And I almost felt like, I was privileged enough to have the time, right? Maybe not many resources, but enough resources to do something about the problem. So I almost felt like it was kind of my duty, as a human being to do something. Yeah, but I totally agree with what you said. I think for me personally, and also because I've been an investor, all my career, kind of also on that side. So both on the entrepreneurial side and building something, and then also on the investor side, I do see value in different types of entrepreneurship. So for example, I also, in general, like unicorns. I think some of them are doing amazing work, and they need to scale, and they can really change the game. And so I have, I'm close to a lot of unicorns, but it's not for the sake of just fitting a media story or just fitting expectations, right? And it's also, I think, to your point, it can, this disruption idea, like to break things at all cost, like what are the consequences of that? And why would you do it just for the sake of doing it? I think it's really, is it like a social solution that you're scaling? To give you one example, at 2X Global, which is like the organization where I'm the CEO of and have been for the past many years, we have like a model of employing employees all over the world. And we do this through a local payroll provider, which is really a game changer, because for the first time you can hire somebody anywhere in the world and give them full social security benefits and like, you know, all the protections of the law, etc., parental leave, right? Like not only what the company offers on top of that, but really like the statutory benefits, right? So it's amazing, because if I want to employ somebody in Austria, they have like full benefits of Austria. If I employ somebody you know, in Australia or in Colombia, it's the same. And that company that built the solution is a B Corp, because obviously they have an amazing social purpose. Their purpose was to address brain drain, so that people don't have to leave their home countries and, you know, migrate or relocate with their families, but can do really access meaningful jobs wherever they are based. But they're also unicorn because they have an incredible solution. And I think they totally deserve that unicorn status. But then there are also, you know, other examples. And so, but similarly, it depends on the problem you're solving. I remember I had so many, you know, kind of just, I saw a problem, I did something about it. And often it was in the space of social entrepreneurship. And after having done that many years, you know, never earning much revenue or anything from it, because that wasn't my point. My point was I wanted to create social impact. But after many years of doing that, I had this really memorable conversation where one of my colleagues in the industry said, you know, with all the hard work you're doing and the impact you're creating, you should be a billionaire by now. I was like, I'm not even, you know, like, I'm not even ready to like pay a house or anything. But that's not the point. That's not why I did it. Yes, I could have, you know, probably with that workload, I could have probably created something, I don't know if $1 billion, right? But like something. But the point wasn't making money. And so I think being also very clear about what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it and what the driver is, I think really matters to me.
What I would like to contribute is also to define the enough. I think it's very important to define the metrics. You know, it's not always about scaling high. You can also scale deep, you know. You can improve the quality, not in numbers, not the quantity, but the quality. And if you define the enough, or if you define the metrics, you can also say, I'm rich in time, for example. I always said I want to become rich and famous because I didn't know what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. So just looking backwards, you can connect the dots, you know. But then I said, like, okay, rich and famous. And then at a certain point, I was defining my richness. I'm a time millionaire. And that's what you also said, Jessica, that it depends what we do with our time, I think.
I love that. Yeah.
I mean, famous. I mean, yeah. I mean, as soon as you're invited in such a studio, you are kind of famous. And also when people mention your name in the room full of opportunities, then that's, for me, it's also a sign of being famous. I mean, you know, you can always define the metrics yourself. It's my little punk attitude.
Yeah. And famous for what, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you actually want to be famous for? Yeah. I want to come back, Clôd, to what you said about regenerative innovation. Because when I first met you, it was through your innovation agency. So I would love to hear a bit more, you know, from that upcycling business, the fashion business. How did you continue from there? Like, what is it that you do in the innovation space, and what does it mean, regenerative innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I then studied in my second studies innovation management. So I got all the tools and all the wording for the methods that we used anyway, you know, design thinking, quick prototyping, all of it. now we had the whole decade or longer where we used the word sustainability and so on, and now we switch to regenerative because it's more important to regenerate. It means like adding more, making things better, improving things, than just sustain what there is, because the status quo is already very crazily destroyed and so on. So we shouldn't sustain what there is. We shouldn't sustain the patriarchy for sure, but we should regenerate in a new way and adding things and make it circular also. That's very important. I think most of the big ventures or unicorns are like linear. Also, when I see a unicorn in my imagination, it's always like flying somewhere off and linear and not coming back, but
Flying
what
to the exit,
yes, the exit is gone. But what I really like is creating circular things, because that's also what nature is doing. Lately, I like to use the picture of a garden and use the seasons of a garden, with grounding, composting, what is a very important part also of bringing back to the soil, bringing back, closing the cycle. Also, when it comes to knowledge sharing, lessons learned, bring it back, and then seeding, and then nurturing, and then harvesting and growing. No, first growing and resting, so important. No one is resting nowadays. And if we all rest, we don't use so many resources, just sitting and resting and let it grow. It's very important. I mean, you can't basically pull the grass out of and the salad out of the ground. You have to wait and sit and watch it grow and do its miracles, and then again harvesting, and then again composting, and so on. It's a cycle. I like that. It's very relaxing for me, because I can see that my life is going in cycles. It's always going back again and going down again, and being earning less money, and businesses are going down and so on, but then it's going up again. So it's a cycle, and it's very relaxing for me to have that picture in my mind and to tie it to nature.
I mean, it's so great you bring this up, because there's so many things that are cyclical, like you just mentioned the seasons, right? Or if you look at also like the reproductive cycle for women, it's like every month it's a cycle. But the world is designed in a linear way, 9 to 5, and it doesn't, businesses don't take into account winter and time of wintering where you just rest. And what if we did, what if instead of this like linear thing, businesses were designed circularly, not just in terms of the products they're creating, but in terms of the way of working. I think I listened to some podcast a few years ago when I was doing the women-centric design research. And this, what I heard is that like women are, we are operating on 2 cycles. Like there is the circadian rhythm, which is like the day and the night, which is also a cycle, but then also our reproductive cycle. But at work, we are only operating on the circadian cycle, and men only operate on the circadian. So they are fine, or more fine, but doesn't really take into account what we need, which is also like the few days of rest and then a few days of birthing and like whatever it might be. But if they took that into account, if the way we work took that reality into account, it would also be better for everyone else, not just for the women. So I like the analogies of circularity that you're bringing in, which exist in nature and inside our bodies, however, somehow not in the conventional way of working.
Yeah, I love this, because you're bringing it back to this design question. And I wanted to ask you more about that. So maybe we can actually take that example, like what would it look like to design the world of work around a cycle?
Yeah, I actually haven't thought about this actively, when maybe Clôd, we can answer this together. But I think, let's think, if we just take a step back and think about how we've known work. The way I've known work is that I wake up on Monday and then I work like as much as I can until Friday, and then I just like am pooped, and then I'm like trying to rest for 2 days, and in that I'm also doing all of the other life stuff I need to do, and then I kind of go back to the same thing. And in the midst of that, I have project cycles and things like that. But really, it's not taking my human aspect into account. And that's why we are hearing things like burnout or high attrition rates, or, people not staying in their jobs long enough because they don't feel cared for. But what if we did take that into account? Like, what if a business took into account, or the strategy took into account what you were saying around resting, and they were like, okay, we're going to do this. Like, businesses make these like 10-year strategies, but then do they take a moment to actually like reflect on what's happened? Yes, they do, over like a 1-week debrief, or like, whatever. They do, not even 1 week, sometimes 1 day debrief in some conference room, they don't allow time for things to come out, and then they're on to the next 10-year plan. So how do we think about the circles of the people that are working there, the services that they're providing, how does the service need to evolve or change, the solutions that they're providing, and also the strategies, how they're seeing long-term growth, or not long-term growth, but rather long-term solutioning or goals.
Yeah, actually, I'm trying to think, I've seen, I think, like a few examples that try to, of companies that try to build in some, hacks that are about considering, for example, I don't know, women's cycle or something like that. But where I've also seen it more recently is actually in sports, so in workout. And like, especially in this longevity trend where, for example, like now those who are a bit more forward looking, are kind of saying, okay, if you're a woman, actually you should plan your workout around your cycle, right? Because there's like a phase where you have a lot of power, a lot of energy, so that might be good for, I don't know, weightlifting, or, like really giving it all. And then there's like another part of the cycle where you should take it easy, maybe do yoga or something else. So I love that. And I think, I would actually also love to invite our audience, if you have any examples that you've seen, of companies or workplaces thinking about this, structuring it more in cycles, not only for women, right? Also for women, but in general, like, what do you see? And any interesting examples, would love to hear in the comments.
Yeah, I think what I will just add to that is one of the things I struggled with in my venture around women-centric design was, part of the issue is that it's in the name, that it's called women-centric design. And so then you start thinking it's just for women. I tried a lot to think about a better name, and I have not come up with one. So if someone in the audience has some ideas, that's also great. But, I think for me, one of the core things about women-centric design was we are looking at an audience that's been minoritized and drawing from that where we have missed out on things so that we can make things better for everyone. And so, like, I think the sports example you gave is great. Like, I use this some workout app, and it has like, something for the menstrual cycle. And that's great. That's step one. But I think step two would be like, because the menstrual cycle is something that only the women are using. Step two would be to integrate that also into all the workouts. Let's say you're doing like a yoga thing, and it's not part of the menstrual cycle workout, but it says like, hey, if you're menstruating, or, if you are feeling XYZ, then you don't do this pose. That changes the thinking inside of everyone. One, it makes everyone else more aware of menstrual cycles or cycles in general. And it makes the people who are not thinking about these things also aware of it. So I think, to bring this thinking into our businesses, it would be about actively talking about the importance of rest, not just for women, but for everyone, because everyone needs to rest. So how do you bring something from somewhere that is actively affecting maybe that group, but can be beneficial for everyone is really the benefit, I think, of this kind of cyclical thinking.
So when we're looking again at design and the work that you've been doing, you mentioned that you started in human-centered design, but then you saw that, we call it human, which should include all humans, but actually there was then this blind spot that it did not serve women specifically, so you focus more on women-centric design. But then it kind of gets pigeonholed into women, even though you see that when you have women-centric design, it ends up serving everybody. And you ask about the term, the no-brainer would be, well, call it human-centric design, but then you have again like that issue, right?
Cycle.
So yeah. So can you talk a bit more perhaps about what is it for those in the audience who perhaps haven't heard about human-centric design or women-centric design? And then why is it so important to make sure that the solution or product we design is actually useful?
Yeah, and Claude, you should also jump in because you also know a bit about human-centered design. But at the and really, like, I think human-centered design has been around for a long time, and now I think people are even thinking about a bigger term that is planet-centered design or care-centered design. But for the sake of definition, human-centered design is about really understanding. If you've seen a problem, let's say, like you say like, oh, I can see that people are throwing trash on the street or whatever it might be. Then you want to understand why that human is throwing trash on the street. What are their barriers to not throwing it in the trash can? And how can you make a solution that allows for the human to, do the right thing? And so human-centered design, the way it would approach this problem is to really observe the ecosystem of what's happening, speak to the humans involved, really understand the context that they're coming from, their barriers, and then after having a good amount of these conversations, really coming up with like key tension points or insights which allow for the solution design to be more holistic. And what I learned by working in international development and social impact, I happened to be on these projects that were women's focused. So, I was on reproductive healthcare projects and female financial inclusion projects. And what I kind of noticed was that there are people who are understanding that women are more likely to get left out in solution design, which is why these gender-centric projects exist in the first place. That there's reproductive healthcare focused on women and there's financial inclusion focused on women and things like that. So it's not that people are blind to it. I think there is a group of people that is seeing it. And I was learning a lot about the barriers women are experiencing in all of these different sectors. I was working in healthcare and finance, whatever it might be, but a lot of the barriers were very similar because their lived experience comes out of the same context. And so what I felt was needed was that if we are working for a solution that takes women into consideration, we don't need to start from scratch. Like, we know that women's lived experiences means that they're probably minoritized, that they're, given in a certain cultural context. We have so much information around that. What can we learn from that information so that we are a little bit primed to think about key topics that really, really matter to women? So, for example, one of the key themes in my toolkits is around safety. And you might think, okay, safety comes into consideration for like being on the street, physical safety. Like, Uber launched without having any safety features. They just launched, even though half the population of the world is women. They didn't take that into account. What if they had just thought about that, So human-centered design, in essence, is actually an inclusive design practice that can really be designing with diverse community members. But we do live in a world that, in my world, like we call it one-size-fits-men kind of world, which means that often solutions are designed with a default person in mind. So a great example of this is cars are actually designed only with men in mind. And when there was a study done on this, they found that women were, I think, 17% more likely to die in a car crash. Why? Because when they did the tests with the dummies in the cars, the dummy was male-sized. It didn't take into account the breasts or the height or the way women's bodies are different, basically, and that has an actual effect on women. And so, because we have all grown up in this kind of default mindset or designing for a default human, we think that all humans are affected in the same way. We have to pepper human-centered design, which is really an approach of being in conversation with people who are experiencing the problem and designing with the insights that come out of those conversations. We have to pepper that with really ensuring that we are understanding the communities that have been historically excluded, understanding their lived experiences, and really keeping those lived experiences front and center. And I got to do a lot of work with women and in the gender space, and it made me realize that unless we specifically call out a project to be women's focused, we are not really thinking about women, unless it's like a reproductive healthcare project. And even that, I think, can be even more women-centric. And let me explain what I mean by that. So, for example, reproductive healthcare, you automatically think, oh, if there's a reproductive healthcare service, it's designed for women. And yes, usually it is. But you can make it even more women-centric by thinking about the role of men in reproductive health. Why aren't we thinking about men? I mean, they essentially create 50% of the child, right? They also reproduce. They also have reproductive health. And that's how you can make it more women-centric, because then you share the burden of reproductive healthcare among many genders. Now, if we look at the flip side, where we see projects that are, unless they're called women's focused, we don't think about them at all, like finance or cars or things like that, then we really have to start taking into account not just who has been excluded, but how have they been excluded. And so my work around women-centric design was really to understand the ways in which women are, recurringly kind of excluded. What are those like key themes that keep coming up no matter what the topic? So for example, a very straightforward topic is safety. When we think about safety, we think about it, being on the road or being in the car or whatever. But really, it actually also, exists in other spaces like finance. You might imagine, you, for example, we know that women are less likely to invest in stocks or funds or whatever, because historically women have just not had access to those things. So there's a bigger fear factor. That is a safety thing. How do we address women feeling safer to go into these kinds of spaces as well? Another one of my themes was around, again, like the role of men. How do we bring that, constantly think about what is the role of men in this thing that we are naming otherwise women's focused, and carve out a role for men, because otherwise women will continue to shoulder those burdens. So human-centered design for social entrepreneurs that are designing with historically excluded communities, it's really important to do a deep dive to understand how someone has been historically excluded and how does that show up in today's experiences in their lives, and then how does that then affect in the problem space that they're designing in. So if you were designing a product or service, you said, hey, what does it look like to make this product or service feel safe? Normal human-centered design wasn't asking that question until it was a women's focused project. And then it became about women and it became a women's project. And then I think it gets like kind of pushed into the side. So it's like, oh, for everyone and for women.
Yeah.
But what if you just made something that is safer for everyone, or safer for a bigger group of people? And I think like I was looking at it from the lens of women, but we can look at it from the lens of so many different lived experiences that are minoritized.
So maybe then it is about taking human-centered design, but making sure these lenses are explicit so that when you look at what works for humans, you consider all humans and not one size fits men, basically.
Yes, one size fits men. My favorite phrase for a while.
I have a name for it. All-inclusive.
All-inclusive, yeah.
Centered design.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do.
Nice.
There is what do they call it? Like inclusive design is a phrase for it. But I feel that even human is all inclusive. It should take into account everyone.
I know, of course.
But somehow it's not doing that. So how do you,
But also planet and, planet, Earth, and so on should be included. In the all-inclusive, I mean, human is just human, but we forgot about the planet care. people care,
Yes.
fair share.
Yeah, I think there's new design approaches that are coming, which are like care-centered design or trauma-informed design. I think, it's just going to be interesting to see in the coming years how these get adopted, because human-centered became this like thing that got adopted really fast across the world. Well, not really fast, but it has had space in the world for a long time. And how do we bring some of these other approaches into the mainstream is a question that I think will be lifelong for me.
Yeah. Let going back to the question of what kind of businesses, ventures does the future actually need, is it then more about what we're building or how we're building it? Or is it both?
It's of course both, but the how is very important. I mean, we cannot on the one hand say we run social business or we are sustainable, regenerative, whatever, and then the whole company culture and they exploit themselves, or the CEO is exploiting herself, or things like that. So the how is very important. And the how should always include some kind of ethics. And I really like the permaculture approach. It's coming from nature, obviously, but it's very simple. The ethics are just 3 topics. It's people care, earth care, and fair share. And if we take this into account of how we approach things and build things, then a lot is already done. It's exactly coming back to your lens. It's always where do we put our light and our torch, and where do we still have dark corners, what's the lens, and I think that many people would be annoyed by just hearing, like you mentioned, that company Uber, they didn't think about safety. If as soon as they realized, I think they have been embarrassed, because it is embarrassing. And our mission should really be to just spread the word, talk about it, open the eyes, because in this there is so much joy, and it's so joyful to see new opportunities, and then we come back to innovation. So much innovation and disruption is there in those little gaps that we can see, and we see the gaps as soon as we open our horizon and where we are looking at.
Yeah, and I also think, like, again, to this conventional idea of scaling fast, right? If you don't design well, it just bites back. Then you're scaling fast, but you're actually crushing it. And then if you had given it more thought, designed it well before scaling it, then you might have actually come further faster.
I want to briefly highlight a framework that many investors use when thinking seriously about gender lens investing. The 2X criteria developed by 2X Global are a global industry standard that help investors assess how capital advances gender equality in practice. The criteria focus on companies founded, led, and owned by women, that create quality employment for women, and that provide products and services that improve the lives of women and girls, as well as how financial institutions and funds can make gender equality really a value driver across their portfolios. They're designed to translate gender equality into concrete investment decision-making.
Yeah, I think, the question of like what and how, they're so connected, like you said. Like the example we gave with the ride-sharing apps and the safety feature, like it's not an attack on them. It's that like they didn't maliciously forget about it. It's just even I, as a human-centered designer and a woman, wasn't thinking about these things until I was in so many gender-focused projects, for example, and only then the how came to me. So I think, like, to your point about like talking about it and awareness and not scaling fast, we come back to that, like, how do we build in the moments of reflection, and how do we continue to keep our paths open for not just learning, but also unlearning the way we've been doing things, to allow for that, so that when the scale does happen, it has been really thoughtful and considerate, rather than like going wherever the unicorn was going.
And then we should of course add the why, right? The why, and then And then for whom? And then when we talk about the why, we could always go deeper. Why do we do it? Why is there the problem? Why do we see the problem? Why is it there? So if we take the time, I think it's all about taking the time and giving it some time. And that's the most precious thing we have.
Yeah, this is already getting very practical. And I do wonder for the community listening to this, people who might have an idea they want to pursue, a problem they want to solve, maybe founders who are already on the scale-up journey, or also others who are thinking about how to integrate that thinking into workplaces or business more broadly. What would be the key insights or learnings here? I think something we heard at the very beginning, which I thought was very interesting, you both mentioned this idea of what makes me happy, which sounds at the face of it selfish, but you pointed out that it's actually about thinking, what is the purpose? What is my purpose? What are my values? How can I create in a way that is aligned? And if I'm then, happy, balanced, and everybody thinks like that, then we're already quite a long way in terms of human happiness around the world. So I think that was a really interesting one. We connected on the why and how. So what would you recommend, to somebody listening who's pursuing an idea, who's building a venture? What would be the key insights and learnings?
What I would really like to add is also that if you have that fire, I cycle back to another podcast that you just shared with Jana. She talked about the fire inside. If you see the gap and the opportunity, and you have this fire, and you were talking about your duty, right, to do something, then you should just start. I mean, now I said all the time, take your time and so on, rest and think about it twice. but just start, because being an entrepreneur means just undertake something to change the status quo, and we need people like that. We need to be entrepreneurs. So even if you don't have the big picture, even if you don't know where you would be in 10 years, no one knows where we will be in 10 years. So just start and take your community with you. Don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. I would never do it alone again. Rather stay home than doing it alone.
Yeah, I love this, just start, because again, there's so much uncertainty. We don't know what will be in 10 years. We don't even know what will be in 2 years. Yeah. Just like if you see something, have that drive to roll up your sleeves, just do it, get started. Mm-hmm. I really like that, because I think often we see like the big heavy lift, or we make like such a big deal out of it. But if you just start with something, and then you're on the journey, and things will evolve.
Yeah, I can share like very practical, like make this a bit more real. Like sometimes when I've listened to podcasts and it says just start, I'm like, okay, but start with what? Okay. But I can maybe take it to a level deeper with my example. Like when I was starting Unconform, which was my company that would explore the idea of women-centered design, I was alone in my home with this idea in my head, and my 5 years of whatever, or how many ever years of working in the gender space. And I decided that just start does not mean to boil the ocean. And what could be one small way that I was, making this thing that I wanted to do real. And for me, that was writing one newsletter a month. And I committed to that. So commit to that. So just start and kind of commit to it, unless it feels, of course, really miserable. But can you commit to writing one newsletter a month about whatever you've learned in the topic? And that could be just starting, And for me, that was the start. I hadn't even registered my company. I had just started writing one newsletter a month. And I remember even that in the beginning, I sent it to 72 people that I felt comfortable sending it to, of all the people I'd known in my 30 years of life. And over time, it grew. And it allowed me to then, like you said, don't do it alone, find people who were interested in the topic. And then I started to learn from them, to build the content and learning around women-centric design, and bring them into the newsletter and feature them, and not be the only voice. So for me, that's what Just Start looked like. And I think the other thing I learned was, I think who you work with really does matter. Sometimes I've thought about how, choosing like a co-person or a team sometimes is as important or as difficult as like finding the right life partner, maybe even more. Like I having gone through some difficult experiences with that, I learned that if I were to have a co-founder in the future, it would have to be someone who is as passionate about the topic as me and as dedicated as me, but that they would have complementary skills, not substitute skills as me. So they would be bringing something different than me to the business, and that we would have similar ways and values of working. How do you learn that? Only through experimentation, I think. So don't jump in. Be open to the people who are coming to you as you have just started, but always think about like what are the things you need in that partner if you were to choose one.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, as you say, it's at least as important as choosing your life partner.
Yeah, at least, maybe more.
Clôd, you also have a very interesting experience in this, idea of network building. So I think also, again, the conventional model is a bit this idea of one founder, one company. But what we've seen in this conversation is that it can be one founder, it can be co-founders, or it can even be more of a community or network model. Also not, just scaling and dominating with your own company, but maybe thinking about partnerships, network building, replication in different ways as a way to scale. And so when we're thinking about what the future could look like, doing something with others, what have you seen work, or how have you approached it beyond the conventional co-founder, shared equity, in it until exit or for life or something, but like this more kind of collaborative approach of addressing issues?
Yeah, thanks for asking, because this is a topic close to my heart, because in reality, most of us are just solopreneurs, and when I say start something, then it's, of course, you start on your own, but it's so nice to have a team around you. And also, if you commit yourself to something, then it's also good to have an accountability team and to tell it someone, and they would ask you, did you do it or not? And that's why I also created a global club, experts club, where we meet on a weekly basis. I meet with my own little team, my advisory board, my cheerleaders. We meet on a weekly basis for exactly 1 hour, because this is how I have the feeling of there is something around me who knows what I'm working on, who knows what I'm doing. We also set our 12-week goals, like with the OKRs, the objectives and key results. And that's something that allowed me to feel seen and heard in this little space of 60 minutes. And also, I feel more powerful because they know me, they know what I'm doing, they see my patterns evolve over the years, they push me, they say, stop doing this or start doing this. It's really nice. Of course, I would love to see a vampire globally, like that we would all work together, that we could overcome our egos, because what I also see is that when someone has an idea, she tends to just treat it like her own baby and her own idea, and the ego is so hard to overcome, and then it's harder to get the co-worker or co-founder and so on. I wish we could really overcome this and create bigger structures, bigger cooperatives where we actually work together and build wealth together and share our income and share everything we have, capital, like pooling capital, because there's so much out there. We are so rich if we pooled it and then reshared it among each other. I'm really looking also into ROSCAs at the moment, the returning rotating savings and credit associations, how we could pool money, other ways of just the one investor is investing money and you have to hustle and work and to pay back or make it more. This is so extractive and linear. I really would like to create more circular models. But if someone is out there, please reach out. I mean, I can't do it on my own. We have to test it in little circles and then grow it.
I really love that because that's like a model that we've seen like for decades in different African countries, in Asian countries, right? Like around the world. So it's actually really interesting. I think in places like Europe, this might feel still quite like new or nascent, but there's actually so much almost like ancient history or experience that we can draw on. Is that something, Clôd, that you have explored like more concretely? So for example, if somebody is interested, like let's say we have some listeners, maybe a group of solopreneurs or founders who, or even, maybe change makers in a community who are thinking about setting up such a pooling of capital and then, saving and lending, etc. Have you seen, I don't know, any interesting resources, or how could they get started if they want to explore that further?
They should reach out to me, and then we just start a little circle. We'll just do it. And for Experts Club, they can just reach out and grab our playbooks and start their own little group of peer leaders and cheerleaders and advisories and meet on a weekly basis to have their own virtual team. We work globally, so we don't compete. It's also important to really create safer spaces. I did a lot of research, and we tried and tested in the last 5 years how we can really show up and open up and be honest and vulnerable. And that's what we do. And it's really powerful. And I think that we could really disrupt the whole system by creating those little peer leader groups and,
we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. That's amazing. And then, Mansi, I want to double click on a few things that Clôd just shared. So first of all, she said, surround yourself with people, basically referring back to what you had shared, surround yourself with people that you want to have around, that you want to spend time with. So be really thoughtful about a potential co-founder, both from the perspective of skills that you really need and complementarity, but also, again, bringing it back to this idea of who do I actually want to be surrounded by and spend so much limited time that we have on this planet. How do I want to spend this time and with whom? And then, Clôd, you also mentioned again the ego issue, and that's something that I hear all the time from founders, change makers, even from people who don't want, this ego culture, but ego still show up. And part of it is what you mentioned at the very beginning, I think also reinforced by these conventional success metrics, how many employees, how much revenue, how fast did you scale over the last 30 days or whatever it is. And you said you were really intentional about how you measure success based on what you really care about. What would be your advice for somebody to look at success metrics in a different way?
Well, I'm trying. I don't know if I'm succeeding. It's so easy to get sucked into the conventional success. But I think, there's this concept, I did not make up this term, but there's this concept, I think, also coming out of the tech space now called vanity metrics, where, they're just like counting, we have so many monthly average users and we have so many whatever, this and that. And also in the social impact space, I think it's a little bit, dominated by the way that international development social impact space is set up, or even, gender lens investing might be set up. It's like, well, I'm giving you this and you better create like this out of that, And I think it's a very pressurized space, which really like diminishes impact. And so I think really the only way to disrupt that, I think it is what you're saying of like doing your own thing in your like little way, instead of being this like big thing where, I'm a big nonprofit that draws in money from this philanthropy and that family office and I have to deliver on these metrics. In my hometown where the factory we work with in the leather products is based, my dad is also a social entrepreneur, and he started his little nonprofit and he's doing projects in the city. They're hyper local. Nobody even heard of the city, even though it has 4 million people. It's in India. But he has like a food project, a permaculture project, a street cleaning project, and no philanthropy knows about him, but he has just engaged the people of the city to both contribute their time and wealth to this project. And he doesn't have to make any impact reports. And if you go there and you spend time on the projects, you can see there is impact. And I think that's such a different way of doing impact, or reaching the success metrics that you want to. And so like I didn't have a clear like playbook in terms of these are the success metrics that matter. And when I did get investment or grant money for the projects I was doing, I was reporting on like, well, we got so many new subscribers and it was downloaded so many times. And okay, yes, we need to do that for the world that we live in. But for me, what mattered the most was like when I gave a talk and someone wrote in the comments, this was a life-changing talk for me. They were like small comments that really were coming from the heart. And I was like, okay, people are showing up and saying that this resonated with them. It changed something for them. And it may be small numbers. It may not be numbers I'm going to report in an impact report, but that is the real deal. And it connects back to why we do this work.
And on that note, I know that a lot of entrepreneurs in our global community and different spaces also sometimes struggle with self-identifying as an entrepreneur, right? Because I think there's also such high expectation about who has the right and legitimacy to call themselves an entrepreneur. So after everything we've discussed, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Who's an entrepreneur?
Everybody. Everybody is an entrepreneur. We see something and then we do something for it or against it. So, yeah. I mean, it's not always turning into a business, what we do, as you just explained with your father and the NGO and so on. But entrepreneur comes from the word entreprendre, French, and it means to undertake something and to take something in your hands. That's it. And it's very important that we don't use all those words and you know, keep people away from just starting. It's important that we don't surround ourselves with all those words, the buzzwords.
Yeah, it's making me think about, I grew up in India, and India is really a country of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Everyone has their, you know, there's the guy selling chai on the street and the little corner shop and the fruit seller and he's a hawker, and they're all entrepreneurs. They all have their own business. And you're really making me think about like the root of these words, like you spoke with entrepreneur, but we've also grown the vocabulary, right? Like, why did we come up with the word solopreneur? It was to separate from the word entrepreneur, to kind of say, are we trying to say that solopreneur is not as good as entrepreneur? Maybe. That's what it's making me think about in this moment, right? Like we have tech entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and solopreneur, and yeah, it brings more clarity, but it also maybe in some form might diminish really the entrepreneurship that you're doing or the undertaking that you're doing. So yeah, I don't really have a clear definition of entrepreneur, but you know, these are just the thoughts that are coming to mind. I think at the beginning when you wanted to have me on this podcast, I think I said to you, like, I'm not really an entrepreneur, Jessica. I'm just a freelancer who does different things. But I think, yeah, I think as long as you have projects, whether they are for work or not, you're an entrepreneur.
It's very interesting about the terminology because, as you say, you have solopreneurs, but you also have freelancers that you just said. A lot of people say I'm self-employed, right? Like there are a lot of different, and I think it also just shows like the spectrum of diversity of what it can mean to be an entrepreneur. Maybe what your dad also does, you know, a social entrepreneurship. So like entrepreneurship with the company and then the NGO, maybe that's the way it is done, right? Like really seeing it as solving a problem like you would address a business problem. Maybe that mindset means that it's actually also social entrepreneurship. So there's so many different nuances and I think also such a diversity and richness in what we're seeing. And I think for me, what differentiates an entrepreneur from somebody who's not an entrepreneur is actually mindset. So it's not something, you know, like you have to attain a certain status or really prove yourself to somebody else or, you know, like have that legitimacy in that sense. Or it's also not something that you're born with or anything. For me, it's like a mindset. It's how you approach it. Somebody sees a problem and they wait for others to do something about it. Somebody sees a problem, you know, and they, I don't know, maybe they donate and hope somebody does something about it, right? So they do play some kind of a part. And then others just see the problem, roll up their sleeves, and they act on it. And that for me is an entrepreneur at whatever scale it is.
Yeah.
Nice.
I love that. Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to say, Clôd?
No, that's nice. And I really want to separate like social entrepreneurship and just entrepreneurship. Because I mean, you know, you can roll up your sleeves and then do crap. But you can also roll up your sleeves and like nonsense, just like creating another drink, or I don't know, you know, I mean, I'm really not, I don't support those entrepreneurs when I do mentoring or anything like that. I really say, think circular, how can you give back? How is it impacting the planet and your community and so on? So this is really, for me, this is crucial that we start social enterprises. We don't have the time to just create another waste problem or something like that by rolling up our sleeves and creating another soft drink, or I don't know. I've seen all of them.
On the point of, you know, entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship, I think sometimes social entrepreneurship also feels like, you know, almost either kind of in a hierarchy, it's less than, right, because it's not serious entrepreneurship, or I think also sometimes actually putting that on a pedestal, like, oh, but to be a social entrepreneur, you have to do so much more. You have to have the perfect balance between profit and purpose. But I even think like in entrepreneurship overall, there's really this trend to think more about purpose, impact, you know, why are you actually doing this? What does the world need? So I think even in mainstream entrepreneurship, we are seeing this really strong trend and thinking about consequences, as you said, for planet, for people. What are you actually solving? Is that even a solution the world, the future needs? Yes. So I think it's actually, for me, it's even broader, right? I think every entrepreneurship should ask those questions.
Yeah, they should.
So for our community who now got really excited about what they heard, where can they follow your work? And also, can you point out any other resources? You know, again, if somebody wants to take one step today or start something next week, or even just do a shift in how they do things, what are some useful tools that they can go next?
I can share. So my toolkit can be found at womencentricdesign.org. Or if you just look up women-centric design, maybe, who knows, maybe some success metrics have got me to the first page of somewhere of one of the search engines. But you can find all of the information about the toolkit there. There's lots of things to dive into, and lots of case studies on it as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I would like to invite people to follow me on LinkedIn because, as I said, I'm hyper creative and doing this and that. And I have several, not hats, but in my garden, I have several plants. So, yeah, it would be nice to connect on LinkedIn and then start a discussion about Roscas, pooling capital and so on.
Great. I love the invitation. I really hope that's something, something that we've planted a seed and that we'll see what's coming out of this. So please do make sure to follow Clôd and Mansi. Also, feel free to share in the comments what you're doing, what you've seen, great examples, and let's start building that community because that can really go a long way beyond having a podcast conversation to actually activate some change.
Nice. Thank you, Jessica.
Any final message? If people take away one thing from this conversation, what's the call to action? What's the key insight?
For me, it's really a little bit crazy. What I try to share. It's on the one hand, it's start. Go for it. On the other hand, it's rest. Please, let's rest more. So it's this two poles, and I think between two opposites, there is energy flowing. It creates energy. So that's what I want to share.
I think I'll piggyback on that, and instead of seeing this as two poles, I see it as like, I think I talked about with our leather brand, living in the reality of overproduction and not needing more, but having to create still in order to not completely destroy everything. And so I feel like there's something around balance that's really important in this conversation. Like, if you rest too much, you never start. If you start too much, you'll never rest. And neither of that is good. So how can you find the balance that works for you? How can you find a balance that works for your business? How can you find the balance of success metrics? You don't want to hide in your internal success metrics also. I think there's so much around, maybe life is, and entrepreneurship is about finding the balance that works for you.
Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mansi and Clôd. Super interesting. Really love all the work you're doing. And we'll definitely reconnect with you because, again, this is not one person, one company. It's a portfolio and there's always new things bubbling up. So we'll be very keen to follow your journeys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.